My name is June Holloway. I'm 35 years old, and at 7:16 on the 4th of July, while citronella smoke drifted over the damp lawn and barbecue grease hung in the humid air behind my grandmother's old bed and breakfast, my mother finally said the thing this family had been rehearsing around me for years. Sparklers cracked near the dock. Ice shifted in plastic cups. Children ran past the hydrangeas with red sugar on their mouths. My younger sister, Celeste, stood near the porch steps in a white sundress with her hair curled for photos, smiling the way women smile when they think a room has already agreed to admire them. Then, Patricia Holloway dropped the antique inn keys into her hand in front of cousins, neighbors, 2 repeat guests, and 1 local wedding planner and said, "Guests remember her smile, not the woman who scrubs the damage." She said it lightly, almost like a joke, which made it land harder. Mark laughed into his drink. One cousin looked away. Another kept smiling because some people will choose comfort over accuracy every time. I was still holding my phone from a payout alert I had checked by the side gate, with a contractor balance flagged in one window and a July occupancy note in another, because inns, unlike families, do not stop needing systems just because someone lights fireworks over the water. That line should have humiliated me into silence. Instead, it clarified everything. I didn't remind my mother who dealt with the hurricane repairs, the tax notices, the vendor debt, the guest complaints, the payroll gaps, or the online reviews that almost buried the place after the storm. I didn't ask Celeste whether she knew what our restoration loan covenant required by month end, whose name sat on the lodging license, or who actually held the merchant account that made summer reservations worth anything. I just stood there with smoke, salt air, and old resentment in the back of my throat, and understood, all at once, that none of this was sudden. Celeste got displayed. I got deployed. Celeste got the face. I got the file. In this family, I was good enough to save the inn, just never good enough to be named its future. So I set my untouched plate on the buffet table, picked up my bag, and left them their little coronation before they could ask me to smile for a picture. 4 days later, the travel platform risk team and the bank called because Celeste's New Era posts had reached the people who actually read contracts, and the license, the payouts, and the restoration loan still ended in my name. Before I tell you what froze first, and why my mother suddenly needed me not to make the holiday ugly, tell me what time it is where you are, and where you're watching from. I always want to know how far a story like this travels before it lands on someone who already knows what it feels like to save the property and still get written out of the welcome. Here's what they didn't understand when my mother dropped those antique inn keys into Celeste's hand, like she was handing over legacy instead of staging another theft in softer lighting. They thought they were doing what they had always done: give the photogenic daughter the symbol, push the practical daughter into function, and trust that I would keep the machinery underneath it all running, because I always had. What they were actually doing was launching an ownership story on top of a lodging business they did not control. I work in hospitality revenue and short-term lodging operations, which means I do not hear phrases like new era the way my mother does. I hear payout exposure, licensing liability, restoration loan compliance, booking integrity, vendor fragility, and the exact point where family sentiment starts pretending it can outrun contracts. 3 years earlier, after hurricane damage nearly erased the inn for good, I did the work nobody in my family wanted attached to their names. I negotiated with contractors when the porch and second-floor plumbing had to be rebuilt in phases because we could not afford a full closure. I covered emergency shortfalls from my own savings when payroll, roof tarps, and guest refunds collided in the same month. I cleaned up tax notices. I restored the review platform reputation after a season of cancellations and angry guests made the inn sound like a cautionary tale instead of a business. I took the restoration loan in my own name because the bank had finally stopped believing my mother's optimism counted as repayment strategy. I held the lodging license because the county wanted one competent operator to point at. I administered the merchant payout account because no one else in that family understood reserve holds, fraud triggers, or payout timing. None of that photographed well. Celeste still got to be the one in white dresses on the porch, arranging hydrangeas and old glass pitchers, talking about charm and southern hospitality, and being praised as the future face of the inn. I got the damaged booking emails, the contractor draws, the payroll patches, the liquor rider reminders, the review recovery, and the ugly privilege of being treated like labor inside a property that would have closed without me. By 7:42 the next morning, I was at my kitchen table in Charleston, with cold coffee beside my laptop, pulling the whole chain into one clean folder, because I already knew the 4th of July had not ended at humiliation. It had moved into exposure. Lodging license renewals first, with my name still sitting there as the active holder. Then the merchant payout administrator logs. Then the restoration loan documents and month-end compliance schedule. Then the contractor invoices, bank transfer records, and archived messages from the months my mother now likes to call that difficult patch, as if the inn had not been one bad quarter away from becoming a moldy memory with a nice dock. After that, I opened Patricia's emails, and once I stripped the mother voice out of them, they read like a confession. Save the inn quietly. Do not frighten your sister with numbers. Celeste is what guests connect to. After everything I did to keep this place alive, don't punish us with paperwork. There it was again. Celeste got the smile. I got the solvency. She got the porch. I got the chain beneath the porch. At 8:19 Monday morning, I made the first professional move. I did not call my mother and ask whether she had already told staff, wedding planners, and half the county that Celeste was taking over in any legal sense. I did not send Celeste a wounded sister message about gratitude or the difference between holding keys and holding liability. I confirmed the license status, checked the payout controls, reviewed the restoration loan file, and emailed the travel platform's risk team, instructing them to route any inquiry tied to operator transfer, merchant authority, or ownership language through me in writing. Then I sent a second note to the bank and the insurance broker, clarifying that no transfer of licensed operations, payout administration, or borrower responsibility had been executed, and that any public representation suggesting otherwise should be treated as premature. No threat, no speech, just the end of assumption. The consequences moved faster than I expected. By Monday afternoon, the travel platform wanted to know whether Celeste's New Era posts reflected an actual operator transition or just branding language. By Tuesday morning, the bank wanted to know whether the restoration loan compliance check should be treated as unchanged or in transition. Then Tuesday night, Celeste posted a carousel of porch lights, white linens, and cocktails on the dock, with a caption about carrying the Holloway Inn into its next chapter. That was the first clue this was already bigger than one ugly line on a lawn, or one key handed over for effect. My mother had already sold a legal handoff story to the outside world on top of a license, a payout chain, and a loan structure she assumed I would never force into daylight. Funny how often families call a woman supportive, when what they really mean is too disciplined to interrupt the lie. And if they had already started taking prepaid summer bookings under a fantasy, the next question was obvious. What happens when the people who actually hold the money stop pretending the fantasy counts? The first panic call came 4 days after the reunion, at 8:44 Tuesday morning, while I was in the inn office reconciling July room tax entries against 2 contractor draws and a bar invoice that should have been routine if my family had not once again decided to build a public fantasy on top of a file they did not control. I had one screen on occupancy, one on payout timing, and one on the Holloway Inn folder I had been carefully refusing to call a crisis until somebody outside the family used language sharp enough to earn it. The call came from the travel platform's risk team, and the second the woman on the line asked me to verify administrator status, I knew Celeste's little New Era performance had already hit the wrong desk. "Ms. Holloway?" she said, calm in the way people get when they are already documenting. "We need clarification on operational control. We are seeing public ownership language and prepaid summer bookings under a merchant structure that still resolves to you." There it was. Not because my mother had found a conscience, not because anyone at that 4th of July cookout had gone home bothered by the fact that the daughter who saved the property had just been called the woman who scrubs damage. Because the payout chain had finally reached the point where family theater stops counting as authority. I told her to send every concern in writing and to treat any ownership change language as unverified unless it came through me directly. Then I hung up and wrote the line that mattered most in my notes. Public handoff story moving faster than payout authority. At 8:57, the second call came from the bank officer on the restoration loan, and his tone was less cautious than irritated, which in my world usually means someone has already spoken much too confidently in a room where covenants were listening. "June, I need to know whether this property is transitioning," he said. "We've got a compliance check, an active draw history, and now I'm hearing your sister is presenting herself as owner." There was the next pressure point. Celeste had not just posted porch photos and a pretty caption. She had already started selling a future under a loan chain she did not understand. I told him the same thing I told Risk. No borrower transfer had been approved. No operator substitution had been filed. Route everything in writing. By 9/11, both emails were in my inbox, and both carried the same institutional tone my family never learns to fear early enough. Clarify now or the systems will do it for you. At 9:18, my mother called. At 9:23, she called again. At 9:29, Mark left a voicemail in that tired, reasonable tone men use when they want coercion to sound like stability. "Don't make the holiday uglier than it already got," he said. "Your sister has guests calling." There it was again. Their public overreach, my ugliness. Their dependence on my license, my payouts, my loan, my emotional problem. I still did not answer, because discipline is one of the only pleasures left when your family is certain you will eventually reorganize your day around their panic. At 9:37, the family thread woke up after 4 days of Celeste's stock photos, little legacy captions, and my mother writing things like, "Finally the inn is in the right hands." Mom wrote, "June, answer the platform." Celeste followed with, "This is literally just back-end stuff." Mark added, "We have people expecting the weekend to run smoothly. Back-end stuff." As if merchant access, compliance checks, and lodging authority were decorative wiring instead of the thing that keeps a bed and breakfast from becoming a lawsuit with hydrangeas. I let the messages sit and finished the room tax entry, because I wanted one more ordinary business task done before I stepped fully into the emergency they had manufactured. At 9:52, the outside escalation actor arrived in the form my family could not sentimentalize away. The insurance broker called to confirm whether the liquor rider update tied to summer events should be frozen because new owner language was circulating publicly while the insured operations chain had not changed. Not because they missed me. Not because they were sorry. Because money, alcohol exposure, and public bookings do not care about family mythology. I told her no transfer had been approved and asked for every concern in writing. At 10:07, the event planner for a late July wedding block emailed asking whether new deposit instructions were coming from Celeste now, since the in-page says she is taking over. There it was. The lie had already made it all the way to outside clients. Not because anyone had found their conscience, because someone had started spending my authority in public. At 10:24, my mother finally left the voicemail I had been expecting since Saturday. She did not sound maternal. She sounded inconvenienced that the daughter she had publicly downgraded was still sitting inside the machine. "Call me back and fix this quietly," she said. "Celeste has summer guests watching. The bank does not need to be dragged into family matters, and you do not get to humiliate us because you are in one of your cold moods. Fix this quietly." There it was again. Not "I'm sorry," not "can we talk," not even a decent lie big enough to call itself misunderstanding. Just the command. Convert public disrespect back into private labor. Not because they cared, because the file still did. At 10:39, Celeste called, and I answered because I wanted her panic before my mother translated it into something softer and prettier. She did not say hello. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Mom says you're trying to make me look fake." I looked at the license renewal on one screen, the merchant logs on another, and the 3 years I had spent dragging that in through storm damage, bad reviews, contractor overruns, and cash holes while she practiced looking inevitable on the porch. "You posted owner before you had control," I said. "That is not my work." She inhaled sharply. "So you're really going to freeze the whole summer over this?" There was the inversion in its cleanest form. Their lie becomes my freeze. Their assumption becomes my cruelty. "No," I said. "The systems are doing what they're supposed to do." Then I hung up. By 10:58, the platform had sent its formal hold note. By 11:06, the bank officer copied counsel on the compliance question. By 11:14, the broker flagged the rider update for review. The tone had changed from clarification to containment. I sent one sentence to Patricia, Celeste, and Mark after that, and only because I wanted the words somewhere they could not revise later. No transfer has been approved. Then I turned my phone face down and went back to the July occupancy file, because if I was going to be accused of ruining my sister's future, I was at least going to do it after finishing the work that still kept actual guests housed and bills paid. What would you do when the same people who told you not to make the holiday ugly only started panicking once the platform, the bank, and the broker all learned your name was still the one holding their owner fantasy together? The next morning, the problem changed categories. Up to that point, my mother still thought this was about whether I was being generous enough. Celeste still thought it was about whether I was jealous enough to interrupt her spotlight, and Mark clearly believed the right mix of exhaustion and family language could flatten the whole thing into one more back-end mess I would absorb before the open house brunch. But at 8:06 on Wednesday morning, the travel platform sent its formal risk summary. The bank officer forwarded the restoration loan compliance memo with my borrower record highlighted, and the broker's office marked the liquor rider update as pending authority verification. The wording on those 3 messages made my whole body go cold in a way the 4th of July had not. The issue was no longer whether my feelings had been hurt on the lawn. It was whether my name was being publicly leveraged inside a lodging business, payment chain, and loan structure I had never approved for transfer. That was when the story stopped being about hurt and became about self-preservation. I called the bank officer first and asked the only question that mattered. Has anyone represented, directly or indirectly, that I already approved a transition and that the remaining issue is just timing? He paused for half a beat, the kind of pause that tells you someone has already heard a lie dressed in polite language. Then he said, "Your mother described it as a family succession already understood in principle. Our problem is that the loan file does not say what the public story says. Understood in principle. There it was. The Holloway family religion translated into bank language. My work was assumed. My consent was atmospheric. Celeste's pretty little owner fantasy was apparently more real than the file chain I had spent 3 years keeping alive. I thanked him, hung up, and opened a new folder on my desktop labeled exactly what the situation had become. Holloway in/unauthorized transfer assumption/full record. Then I built the path the way I build anything that needs to survive charm, denial, and my mother's soft-voiced revisionism. Source first, document second, meaning third, consequence fourth. Lodging license renewals first, with my name still sitting there as the active holder. Then the merchant admin logs, showing summer deposits, wedding block payouts, and chargeback review all resolving through me. Then the restoration loan documents, covenant schedule, and draw history. Then the contractor invoices from the storm repair months my mother now likes to call that difficult patch, as if the inn had not nearly become a damp little memorial to bad decisions. Then the bank transfer records from my own account, the review platform admin logs, and the archived emails Patricia had sent me in the years before she decided Celeste should inherit the story instead of the risk. Once I stripped the mother tone off them, the emails read almost indecently clear. Save the inn quietly. Do not frighten your sister with the numbers. Celeste is what guests connect to. After everything I did to keep this place alive, do not punish us with paperwork. Punish. There it was again. Not gratitude, not trust, not partnership. Image. I thought about being 32 and meeting roof contractors in wet sneakers after a storm, while Celeste was inside taking doc photos for the inn page. I thought about being 33 and moving freelance consulting money into payroll, while my mother told a repeat guest Celeste had the instinct that keeps the place warm. I thought about being 34 and sitting across from the bank officer, signing the restoration loan extension, because my mother's optimism had finally stopped sounding bankable to anyone sober. Every time I fixed it, they called me family. Every time I protected myself, they called me difficult. At 10:18, the broker sent the official bridge I needed. If the insured operations contact remained unchanged, while public-facing ownership language kept circulating, and summer event alcohol service was being marketed under Celeste's new era, then the problem was no longer internal disrespect. It was active misrepresentation tied to liability. That moved the whole story out of the realm of sibling injury and into professional contamination. If a guest fell off the dock, a chargeback hit, a contractor issue reopened, or an event incident touched that liquor writer while the public story said Celeste and the file still said me, then my family was not just erasing me. They were trying to spend my credibility after publicly downgrading it. At 10:44, my mother called from the inn office line, which meant she was done trying to sound wounded and ready to sound managerial. I answered because by then I wanted her plain voice, not her mother voice. "This has gone far enough," she said. No hello, no June. The platform is nervous. The bank is making this sound worse than it is, and you are not going to turn a family transition into a legal drama because you are in one of your moods. I asked, "Did you tell them I had already agreed?" Silence. Then, "I told them the family had this handled." I wrote that down too, because it was not just dishonest, it was revealing. My mother had never believed my authority was real authority. She believed it was cleanup with credentials, the kind that should dissolve the second the daughter she preferred needed the front porch. No, I told her. What you want is not support. It's retroactive permission. She went sharp immediately. After everything I did to keep this place alive, you owe your sister this chance. Oh, there it was again. Debt. The debt I was apparently supposed to keep paying because I knew how to keep a damaged inn lawful, while everyone else arranged flowers and told stories about legacy. What I owe, I said, is accuracy to every system carrying my name. Then I ended the call and sent one written instruction to the platform, the bank, the broker, and counsel, confirming that no transfer of licensed operations, merchant authority, loan responsibility, or insured contact status had been approved, and that any contrary representation should be treated as unauthorized. At 11:12, Celeste texted, "Mom says you're doing this because no one ever saw you as the face of the inn." I read it once and filed it, because by then I could finally name the relationship accurately enough to stop bleeding inside it. This was not family strain. It was access dressed up as hospitality. Not love, not legacy. Just extraction with hydrangeas. Celeste's summer open house brunch started Sunday at 11 a.m., and I walked through the side gate at 11:19 because timing matters when people are still relaxed enough inside their own lie to keep decorating it. The inn had been staged for inevitability. White hydrangeas sat in chipped blue pitchers along the porch rail. Citrus slices floated in glass dispensers beside the dining room doors. The brunch tables on the back lawn were dressed in pale linen, with little handwritten cards that said, "Welcome to the new era at Holloway House." The air smelled like coffee, buttered biscuits, sunscreen, citronella, and marsh water drifting up from the dock. Repeat guests stood near the porch steps balancing mimosas and smiling that polite summer smile people wear when they think they are witnessing tasteful family continuity. Two local wedding planners were near the pergola, looking at the property with professional interest. The bank's field representative stood near the side path with a leather folder tucked under one arm and the exact stillness of a man who had already learned enough to distrust every soft sentence coming out of my family. Staff moved carefully between trays, trying to act as if this were just hospitality and not a transfer fantasy dressed in brunch clothes. My mother was in the center of it all in a white blouse and pearl earrings, greeting people like she had personally rebuilt the place after the storm herself. Celeste stood beside the front steps in a pale blue dress with one hand resting on the old porch post, smiling in the bright, brittle way women smile when they think witnesses can make a title real. My mother saw me first and crossed the lawn quickly, smile still attached but thinner now. "June," she said under her breath, "do not make this ugly in front of guests." There it was again. Their public lie, my ugliness. Their staged handoff, my timing. "You already did that when you announced an owner before the file existed," I said. Celeste turned at the sound of my voice and raised hers just enough for the wedding planners and two repeat guests nearest the porch to hear. "Look who finally came to support the open house," she said. That was my public stage ignition line handed to me for free. Support would have been a strange word to use before you started taking bookings under systems you do not control, I said. The room did not go silent all at once. It thinned. One planner lowered her glass. A repeat guest glanced from Celeste to me and stopped smiling. The bank rep shifted his folder against his chest and waited. Good. The right people were already listening. I set my folder on the registration table beside the guest cards and opened it without hurry. Lodging license renewal. Merchant Payout Administrator Log, Restoration Loan Compliance Memo, Insurance Writer Review Note. Then I turned the first pages toward the bank rep and the two wedding planners, instead of toward my family, because practical people are usually the first honest people left in a room like that. Before anyone here keeps speaking as though Celeste already owns or operates this inn, I said, the license, the summer payout chain, and the restoration loan file are all still in my name, and no transfer has been approved. Celeste laughed too fast. Oh my God, are you seriously doing this now? You did it first, I said. You just did it with linen and orange juice. That line moved through the lawn because even people who did not understand the full chain understood the shape of the lie. My mother stepped closer and lowered her voice into that sharp whisper she always uses when she wants morality to sound like manners. Be happy for your sister. No, I said. Be accurate. The bank rep opened his folder then and did the one thing my family never anticipates early enough. He used plain language. For clarity, he said, calm enough to make the sentence land harder. The borrower compliance path and associated operating review have not been transferred, and current summer payout activity remains subject to the existing administrator record. One of the wedding planners frowned. The other asked, very softly but not softly enough, then who is actually authorized to confirm event funds and operational responsibility right now? I answered before my mother could wrap it in family sentiment. I am, I said. She is performing ownership on top of it. That was the needle line, and it landed because even Mark stopped pretending he was above the mess. Celeste's face changed then. The polished porch version cracked, and the smaller, angrier thing underneath showed through. You're humiliating me over technicalities, she snapped. There was the inversion exactly where it always shows up. Licensing becomes a technicality. Payout authority becomes a technicality. Loan compliance becomes a technicality. Women like me are always expected to carry the file quietly until the moment we use it. And then suddenly the whole structure becomes just paperwork. No, I said. I'm refusing to let labor be erased into hospitality. Then the front desk terminal inside the foyer answered for me, with a short payout hold alert that carried through the open screen door. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just one small machine refusing to cooperate with my mother's version of reality. The receptionist looked down at the screen, then at the bank rep, then at Celeste, and I watched the room understand itself in real time. One repeat guest took an involuntary step back from the registration table. A planner closed her notebook. The bank rep said, "The hold remains active pending authority clarification." My mother went pale, then furious. After everything I did to keep this place alive, you would shame me like this? She hissed. I looked at the hydrangeas, the dock, the guests, the planners, the inn I had kept lawful through damage and debt, and then back at her. You use strangers as witnesses to a lie, I said. I'm just the first person here willing to name it. That was the end of the performance, even if no one cried yet. Because the room turned procedural. One planner quietly asked whether all summer event dates were secure. The bank rep started making notes. A repeat guest said she would check back later and set her mimosa down untouched. Staff stopped pretending this was simply a pretty brunch. I closed my file, picked it up, and stepped away before the moment could cheapen into tears and amateur family ethics. At the gate, Celeste called after me, voice cracking now. You're doing this because no one ever saw you as the future. I turned once. No, I said. I'm doing this because you tried to wear what I rebuilt. Then I walked out into the wet Charleston heat, while the open house kept trying to breathe behind me, without clean payouts, without settled authority, and without the daughter they had always counted on to make the ugly part disappear. When a family uses your silence as staging for their ownership fantasy, telling the truth is not cruelty. It is the first honest inventory anyone has done in public. The only question left was how much the rest of them were about to pay for pretending not to know the difference. The open house brunch did not make me feel vindicated. It did not send me home glowing with justice or standing in my kitchen replaying Celeste's face with anything that looked like peace. It made me feel wired, nauseated, and so awake at 2:12 a.m. that I was sitting at my dining table with one lamp on, my sandals kicked under the chair, and a legal pad open in front of me with 3 words written across the top in block letters. License, payouts, loan. That is the part people usually lie about when they tell stories like this badly. They pretend public truth heals on contact. It doesn't. Not when your body was trained for years to believe your value lived in how quietly you could absorb operational damage before anyone else had to see it. By Monday morning, the tactic shift had already started. My mother texted first, saying I had embarrassed her in front of guests, planners, and people who did not need to witness private family strain. Mark followed with the practical version, saying the bank rep was now touchy, staff were nervous, and I had turned one family transition into a spectacle. Celeste's messages were worse because she still believed pain gave her moral priority. The first called me jealous. The second said I had always mistaken control for love. The third said I would rather poison the inn than let her have one clean chance. The fourth was the truest without meaning to be. You could have let me have one weekend. There it was again. The whole Holloway theology in one sentence. Let the pretty daughter have the weekend. Let the practical daughter have the burden. Let me carry the storm invoices, the payroll rescue, the review recovery, the payout structure, the liquor rider, the loan compliance, and then call me cruel the second I refuse to disappear behind it. What unsettled me most was not what they said. It was the old trained part of me that still wanted permission. Permission to stop rescuing. Permission to stop translating my mother's panic into sequence. Permission to stop calling my usefulness love. So instead of answering any of them, I did what my family has always hated most. I took the pattern somewhere honest. My therapist, Elise Morton, has an office above a probate law practice near King Street that smells faintly like cedar and printer heat. And by Monday afternoon I was sitting across from her with my jacket still on, because I knew if I got comfortable first, I would start minimizing. I gave her the facts in order because facts are safer than grief. The lawn, the keys, my mother's line, the platform call, the bank call, the broker warning, the brunch, the payout hold, my mother calling me ugly when what she meant was visible. Elise let me finish, then asked the one question that changed the category of the whole story. When did your family first teach you that your competence was the price of staying wanted? I looked at the grain of her desk for a long time because I already knew the answer, and because saying it aloud would make it harder to romanticize later. I was 12 when my mother started leaving room ledgers and supply counts for me while Celeste got taken to the front porch because guests soften around her. I was 27 when I covered my first payroll gap with consulting money and got thanked by being told not to mention the amount because it would make Celeste feel small. I was 33 when I spent 2 months handling contractors, refunds, and bad reviews after the hurricane, while my mother told a wedding planner Celeste had the instinct that keeps the inn warm. Elise did not tell me to forgive them. She asked the better question. How long have you been calling rescue love? That one stayed in my ribs. I went home and wrote the pattern down the way I would write any operating chronology that needed to survive scrutiny. Celeste gets framed. I get assigned. Patricia promises. I stabilize. Mark minimizes. I clean. Public charm on one side, structural labor on the other. Once it was on paper, the guilt lost some of its holiness. It started looking less like conscience and more like conditioning. Then came the meeting. My mother texted Tuesday morning asking for one adult conversation before this becomes permanent, which in my family has always meant let us rename the damage before the file does it for us. I agreed only because I wanted the truth said in a room where nobody could hide behind hydrangeas, summer guests, or my grandmother's memory. We met that afternoon in the inn office after closing, old pine floorboards shifting underfoot, a stale coffee smell caught in the drapes, contractor folders stacked by the printer, and the hum of the ice machine bleeding in from the service hall. My mother started with revision. She said the 4th of July line had been badly phrased, not cruel. Celeste said the brunch had only been meant to create momentum. Mark said no one expected me to make a public issue out of what should have stayed inside the family. Then I laid the file down, one piece at a time. License renewals, merchant admin logs, restoration loan documents, contractor invoices, transfer records. My mother's "save the inn quietly" emails. The room changed the way rooms always change when paper finally outruns tone. My mother snapped first. "You always need documents to feel powerful." "No," I said. "I need documents when people around me keep trying to inherit what I rebuilt." Mark called me rigid. Celeste called me vindictive. Then she said the truest thing in the room by accident. "You could have just approved it and let me have this." There it was. Not family, not legacy. Access. Clean enough to stop pretending. Something inside me went very still then. Not dramatic, not wounded, just finished. "I am not approving a transfer because Mom promised you a future before she controlled it," I said. "I am not restoring payout access so you can keep performing ownership. I am not putting my name back under this inn to protect another public fantasy. And I am done being the daughter you remember only when the systems stop cooperating." My mother called that cruel. Mark said I was making everything final over technicalities. Celeste started crying in that furious, breathless way favored people do when consequence refuses to reorganize itself around their comfort. I stood up anyway. "Not for the season," I said. "Not until you calm down. Done." Then I took my file and left them in that office while they were still trying to turn consequences back into disrespect. That was the kind of stillness that arrives when the last excuse finally dies. The fallout took a little over 5 weeks, and the reason it landed so hard was that it moved through the dull adult places first. Not through screaming, not through one spectacular family implosion on the porch. Through payout holds, covenant review, writer hesitation, vendor caution, and the kind of written clarification that makes charm irrelevant. The travel platform kept the summer payout reserve under active review, which meant deposits my mother had already spent emotionally in public started behaving like what they actually were: conditional funds tied to a file she did not control. The bank did not call the restoration loan, which would have been too simple. It did something worse. It slowed into scrutiny. Compliance stopped feeling routine and started feeling expensive. The liquor rider update stayed unresolved. Event planners got careful. Repeat guests started asking the kind of small, practical questions that tell you they smell instability even if they are too polite to name it. That was the first chain reaction. One wedding planner paused a fall site visit until ownership language settled. A repeat guest who had stayed with us every October wrote asking whether the inn was under new management or merely changing presentation. One local vendor requested prepayment before confirming decor for a September booking. Staff noticed before my family admitted anything. The front desk manager stopped following Celeste's little public instructions and started routing every real question through counsel. The bartender asked whether the writer was still live before agreeing to 2 weekend events. Even the housekeepers got quieter in that particular way workers do when they know the pretty story out front is no longer backed by the ugly work in back. My mother hated that part most. Not that the systems had turned, that strangers had started asking the exact questions I had been answering alone for 3 years. Celeste's post changed too. No more new era. No more little captions about carrying the inn forward. Suddenly, it was dock sunsets, hydrangea close-ups, cocktails on the lawn, cropped corners of the porch. Atmosphere without nouns. That is how people post when the title they announced has stopped cooperating with reality. My mother tried every register she still had left. First bitter, then wounded, then softer and meaner at the same time, which was always her strongest mode. "You are punishing the staff now," she said in one voicemail. "You are punishing your grandmother's house," she said in another. What she never said was the truth. She had tried to hand Celeste a property held together by my license, my payout authority, my loan obligation, my money, and my willingness to stay invisible. The second invisibility ended, so did the fantasy that Celeste's smile counted as infrastructure. I did not rescue the whole inn, but I did one narrow ethical thing, because boundaries are not the same as collateral cruelty. Through counsel, I authorized a one-time release packet for active guest stays and already paid event clients so nobody with a live reservation lost access to arrival details, dietary notes, or vendor timing because my family had built a public fantasy on top of my file. Nothing broader. No restored payout access. No borrower side smoothing. No quiet workaround that let my mother keep telling people the transition was basically done. Just one controlled act separating innocent guests from the mythology that had trapped them inside it. After that, I became unavailable in the only way that matters. Written only. Every platform question through counsel. Every bank question through counsel. Every, "Can we talk as family?" ignored unless it came attached to an actual document and an actual operational issue. About a month after the brunch, the platform requested a formal declaration confirming that no transfer of merchant authority had been approved and that any contrary representation had been made without my consent. The bank requested matching written confirmation that the restoration loan borrower and compliance path remained unchanged. I reviewed both, corrected one date, tightened one sentence, and signed them that same afternoon. No embellishment, no revenge speech, no sentimental footnote, just a clean record. That was more devastating than any scream I could have made on the lawn, because once the facts were fixed in the payout file, the loan file, and the licensing record, my mother could no longer keep narrating me into the role of bitter older sister, instead of the woman who had quietly kept the inn lawful. Facts do not need to be loved. They just need somewhere permanent to sit. Once they do, even the prettiest family story starts sounding rented. A month later, my mother asked to meet, and I almost said no because by then I understood something I had spent most of my adult life trying not to understand. Closure is not the same thing as restored access, and access is not the same thing as love. Still, I agreed to one final meeting because I wanted the truth stated in a room where nobody could soften it back into porch weather. We met in my attorney's conference room at 4:38 on a Thursday, late light flattening against the glass, stale coffee cooling untouched near the side credenza, and the kind of office air that makes every sentence sound more official than the speaker intended. Patricia arrived first in one of her pale wrap blouses, the kind she always wore when she wanted to look maternal, burdened, and morally blameless at the same time. Mark came in next with the posture of a man who had spent years standing beside the wrong decisions and still hoped that counted as calm. Celeste came last, no open house glow now, no dockside confidence, just a woman who had finally learned that being photographed on the porch is not the same thing as carrying a property. My mother opened exactly the way I knew she would. Not with apology, with hardship. "This has been devastating for the family," she said. There it was, the old rearrangement. Blur the damage, make it communal, make it sound like weather so nobody has to name where it began. I let the silence sit there long enough to become useful, then I gave her the cleanest sentence I had. "You handed Celeste an identity built on my license, my payout authority, my restoration loan, and my money, then expected me to keep it all lawful after telling me I was only the woman who scrubbed the damage." My mother cried after that, and maybe the tears were real. They usually are by the time consequence finally reaches people who thought sentiment counted as structure. But tears are weather, not proof, and I had finally learned not to confuse visible hurt with accountability. Mark tried next because men like him always step in after the first softness fails. "We were trying to give your sister a future," he said. "That's all this ever was." I looked at him and felt nothing but accuracy. "No," I said. "That's what you told yourselves. What it actually was another plan built on the assumption that I would absorb the risk and disappear behind it." Celeste spoke then, and the saddest part was that she still sounded more stunned than ashamed. "Mom said you'd understand," she said. "I thought it was basically handled." There it was. The whole family structure in one sentence. She got the promise. I got the process. She got the porch. I got the storm invoices, the payroll rescue, the payout holds, the loan compliance, and the part nobody wanted to romanticize while it was saving them. "That was always the luxury you were given," I told her. "Other people were assigned the seriousness for you." My mother asked the fantasy question after that, the one families like mine always ask once the useful daughter is still physically in the room, but no longer psychologically available on command. "Is there any way to fix this?" she said. That line might once have worked on me because I used to hear vague pain and immediately start converting it into labor. A signature, a transfer, a softened consequence, a way to keep everyone from having to feel the full shape of what they did. But by then, I knew the difference between being needed and being loved, and they are not interchangeable no matter how many mothers cry when the systems stop protecting them. "You can't fix this with emotion," I said. "You can only deal with it through sequence." Then I told them what accountability actually meant. Not tears in a conference room after the public story had already failed. Not calling me family now that the platform, the bank, and the broker had all stopped cooperating. Accountability is changed behavior that costs you something. Accountability is telling the truth before the file forces it. Accountability is admitting out loud that you used one daughter as infrastructure while praising the other for standing on it. My mother flinched at that because it was the first sentence in the room she could not decorate. Mark asked if everything now had to go through lawyers. "Anything involving the license, the payouts, the loan, the insurance, the bookings, money, or emergency rescue does," I said. "For anything else, maybe one day, if behavior changes before language does." That was the real answer. Not reconciliation, not permanent exile. Structure, distance, terms. 6 weeks later, I signed the purchase papers on a smaller historic guest house in my own name on the quiet side of Charleston. Clean title, 9 rooms, a narrow side garden, and a full fall booking calendar before I had even finished choosing the porch furniture. I opened without fireworks. No family speeches, no staged blessing, just direct bookings, functioning payouts, clean coverage, and the kind of calm that feels earned because nobody else is trying to rename your labor while you do it. Then my attorney sent the final notice. Clean, narrow, non-negotiable. I would never again license, fund, insure, guarantee, or quietly save any family property that only valued me when it was failing. No more off-record rescue. No more, just this once. No more maternal urgency used as a solvent for paperwork. I approved the letter without changing a word. That was the deeper revenge. Not that Celeste lost the owner fantasy. Not that my mother had to watch the relaunch shrink under payout holds, loan scrutiny, and licensing questions. Not even that Mark finally had to learn the difference between charm and solvency. The deeper revenge was this. I was no longer available for the role they had written for me. I was not the cleanup woman, not the hidden operator, not the daughter who kept the property breathing while someone else got admired on the porch. They did not miss me as family. They missed the function. Too many families call that love because admitting the difference would force them to look at what they built. So tell me honestly, if your family only remembered your value when the payouts, the loan, or the license were at risk, would you ever let them back in once you finally put your own name on the deed? And what would have been your breaking point? The 4th of July line? The frozen summer payouts? The fake open house? Or the moment you realized they never really meant family in a way that included your dignity?